The square smelled of damp earth and old blood, a scent that clung to the cobblestones even beneath the chill air of early dusk. Torches burned along the edges, their flames casting restless shadows on the faces of the gathered villagers. Whispers stirred like restless leaves, cruel and sharp, circling the figure who stood with her head bowed in the center. Alara's wrists bore rope marks, though no chains bound her. Her father hadn't wasted coin on iron. Humiliation was cheaper. Her stepmother's voice cut through the crowd, high and cold as steel. Here stands the barren daughter, useless to bloodlines, useless to her kin. Let her fetch what coin she may. Laughter rippled in response, brittle, hungry. Alara kept her gaze lowered, the tips of her hair brushing against her cheeks. If she raised her eyes, they would see the fury burning there, and that too would be twisted into entertainment. Her father, Lord Eric, stood at her side, hands clasped behind his back as though this were no more than a livestock trade. He didn't look at her once. She had known he was cruel, but she had not imagined he would parade her in front of strangers, her worth announced in terms of absence. A murmur shifted the crowd, a new presence cutting through the press of bodies. It was not loud but immediate, like the hush before thunder breaks. Alara dared a glance, and her breath caught. A man approached, tall and cloaked in a dark mantle that bore the silver insignia of the crown. The torchlight sharpened the planes of his face. Sharp jaw, eyes that glowed faintly in the dusk like embers hidden beneath ash. A silence followed him, spreading outward in a wave until the whispers died entirely. The Alpha King had come. Lord Eric faltered, his rehearsed cruelty stumbling into unease. He cleared his throat and attempted a bow, shallow, nervous. "Your Majesty," he rasped, "we did not expect." The king's gaze silenced him. Kalen was his name, though few dared speak it aloud without reverence. He stopped before Alara, and the air seemed thinner. Her skin prickled under his inspection. He did not look at her as the others had, searching for weakness. He looked at her as if weighing something deeper, as if the broken shell of her shame hid a secret only he could see. Eric's voice broke the stillness, eager and brittle. "She is barren, Majesty. A curse upon my house. But perhaps of use to another." Kalen lifted one hand, and the man's words died. "What price?" The king's voice was low, carrying effortlessly through the square, leaving no doubt of command. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. The Alpha King, feared in battle, known for his ruthless decrees, why would he buy her? She longed to cry out, to refuse, but her throat locked with the weight of every watching eye. Eric stammered a sum, and Kalen did not blink before a purse of coins struck the dirt between them. It was more than her father had dared hope for. Greed lit his eyes. The rope was released from her wrists, leaving raw impressions, and for a heartbeat she was free. But then Kalen's cloak shifted as he extended his hand toward her. "Come." The word was simple, but it reverberated through her bones. Alara hesitated. Every instinct urged her to recoil, to flee. Yet his gaze held her. Unyielding, dangerous but not cruel. Not like Eric's. Against her will, against her pride, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, neither tender nor harsh, but steady, as though to anchor her when she had nothing left. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the king led her away. Eric watched with a merchant's satisfaction, not a father's grief. Her stepmother's eyes gleamed with triumph, as though casting Alara aside was victory. The palace gates rose high, carved stone and iron, looming with a weight that pressed on Alara's chest. She had never crossed them before. Within, the halls shone with candlelight, polished marble, and whispers that slithered after her footsteps. Servants peered from doorways, eyes wide. Some sneered outright. She heard the words carried on hushed breath. "Barren, useless, unfit for a crown." Kalen walked beside her, silent, his long stride forcing her to quicken her steps. He did not acknowledge the whispers, but once, when a guard's laugh carried too boldly, the king's eyes flicked toward him. The laugh cut off, swallowed by fear. At last, Kalen stopped in a chamber vast and cold, its walls hung with tapestries of wolves mid-hunt. A fire burned low in the grate, its glow too feeble for the room's expanse. He released her hand and turned toward the hearth. "You despise me already," Alara said, her voice rough from silence. The words slipped out, bitter and raw. Kalen looked back at her, his eyes unreadable. "No," he paused, as though testing his own honesty. "But I despise what was done to you." Her chest tightened. the unexpected weight of his words pressing against the brittle cage she had built around herself. She did not trust him, could not. Yet something in his tone lodged inside her. Unsettling silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally he spoke again, quieter. "Rest. You will need strength." "For what?" she asked, the question torn from her. His gaze lingered on her face, steady and strange. "For being seen." Before she could reply, he turned and left the chamber, the heavy door closing with finality. Ilara sank onto the edge of the bed, her fists clenched in her lap. The day's humiliation clung to her like ash. She thought of her father's eyes, cold with profit, of her stepmother's laughter, and of the king's hand, warm and steady around hers from the courtyard below. Faint voices drifted upward. The words carried sharp as knives through the open window. She cannot be queen. The barren girl will ruin him. Her throat tightened, but she did not cry. Instead she rose and went to the window. Across the darkened courtyard, Kalen stood alone, his face turned toward the night sky, as if the moon itself demanded his counsel. Then his gaze lifted, meeting hers across the distance. He did not look away. A shiver ran down her spine, not of fear, but of something dangerous, something that promised this story had only begun. The palace was a labyrinth of polished stone and hushed cruelty. Ilara walked its corridors like a shadow, her presence tolerated but never welcomed. Servants bent their heads when Kalen passed, yet their eyes cut at her with sly disdain once his back was turned. She heard their whispers through walls thinner than pride. Barren, cursed, unworthy. The words burrowed into her skin like thorns. In the grand hall, noble women gathered like jeweled predators, their gowns rustling as they circled her with feigned smiles. Lady Mirith, whose voice dripped with honeyed poison, leaned close enough for her perfume to choke. "How strange," she murmured, "that a king with endless choices would take in one so empty." The others tittered, their laughter as sharp as glass. Ilara bit her tongue until it bled, refusing to give them the satisfaction of tears. Yet inside, humiliation burned that night. When the court had dispersed and the torches guttered low, Ilara wandered alone through a colonnade open to the cold air. The moon was swollen above the towers, silver spilling like water across the stone. She drew her cloak tighter, longing for silence, but footsteps echoed behind her. She turned to find Kalen, his expression carved from shadow and firelight. "You hear them," he said, voice low. It was not a question. Her throat tightened. "Their words are knives. But knives only cut what is weak." He studied her, as though gauging how deep the wound truly went. "You do not know your strength yet." The statement struck her as strange, almost cruel. "Strength?" She let out a hollow laugh. "What strength belongs to me? I was sold as one sells a goat too thin for slaughter." His jaw flexed, a muscle ticking with restraint. He stepped closer, the air between them charged with heat despite the night's chill. "Your father's greed does not define you." Before she could answer, a sound split the silence, a low growl, deep and feral, rising from the darkness beyond the colonnade. Kalen stiffened, his body a line of tension. From the shadows lunged figures, their eyes gleaming, their forms caught between man and wolf. "Rogues." Ilara froze, heart thundering as claws scraped against stone. One leapt toward her, teeth bared, and in the blink of an eye Kalen moved. His cloak shredded as his body shifted with a terrible grace, bones cracking, muscles rippling into monstrous strength. Fur burst across his skin, his form towering, both man and beast. The Alpha King stood revealed, his eyes burning with primal fire. The rogue collided with him, but Kalen met the attack with a roar that shook the colonnade. Stone cracked beneath their struggle, blood and fury splattering the night. Ilara stumbled back, pressing against the wall, terror clashing with awe. She had heard tales of his power, but no tale had prepared her for this living storm of violence and command. Another rogue broke past him, lunging at her. She raised her arms instinctively, certain her life was about to end. Yet when its claws raked her skin, something impossible happened. The wound flared with light, pale and fierce, spilling across her flesh like liquid moonfire. The beast recoiled with a snarl, blinded by the glow, before Kalen's strike tore it apart. Ilara stared at her hands, trembling. Blood dripped from her skin, yet the torn flesh closed before her eyes, leaving behind only the faint shimmer of silver veins. She had no breath to scream, only silence and disbelief. When the last rogue fell, Kalen stood over the bodies, chest heaving, his fur drenched in blood. Slowly, painfully, his form returned to human, the beast receding until only the man remained. He was wounded, deep gashes carved into his side. Elara rushed forward before her fear could halt her. Her hands, glowing faintly still, pressed against the wound. Heat surged from her palms, coursing into him, knitting flesh where death had clawed. Kalen's breath caught. His eyes locked onto hers, unreadable, but alive with something more than shock. "What are you?" His voice was raw, shaken for perhaps the first time she had ever heard. "I don't know," she whispered, and the truth terrified her more than the attack had. They stood in the ruin of stone and blood, the night wind carrying the stench of death. Somewhere beyond, horns sounded, the guards too late to be of use. Kalen straightened, his wound gone as though it had never been. He glanced at her hands again, his expression dark with calculation and wonder. Back in the chamber, after the bodies were cleared and the guards sworn to silence, Elara sat before the hearth, her cloak wrapped tight though sweat slicked her skin. Kalen stood at the window, his back to her, a silhouette against the rising moon. "There is a prophecy," he said finally, his tone careful, deliberate, "spoken long before you were born, that a woman marked barren would carry within her the fire to change kingdoms. They feared her, called her cursed, cast her aside. But the prophecy called her chosen." Elara's pulse raced. The words wrapped around her like chains and wings at once. "You think that woman is me." He turned, his gaze searing through the shadows. "I know it is." Her lips parted but no sound came. The flames in the hearth hissed, spitting sparks that scattered across the stone like stars. The air between them tightened, heavy with something neither dared name. Kalen's eyes lingered on her glowing hands before flicking to her face. "You are not barren, Elara. You are more dangerous than any of them could imagine." Her heart pounded with dread and something far sharper. Hope, fragile and fierce. Yet she knew danger loomed heavier now than ever. For if the court whispered before, they would howl once they learned the truth. Kalen moved closer, his presence a wall of heat, his voice a vow carved in iron. "I will protect you. But you must decide if you will protect yourself." Elara met his gaze, firelight dancing in his eyes, and for the first time in her life she felt the fragile edges of destiny curling around her. Whatever path lay ahead, it would not be walked in shadows. The door shuddered then, wind rattling its frame, as though the palace itself had overheard their secret. Somewhere deep in the stone, a whisper seemed to stir, calling her name in a tongue she did not yet know. She shivered, not from cold, but from the certainty that her life was no longer her own. Morning light spilled across the palace stones, gilding them in false warmth. Elara moved through its corridors with the memory of moonfire still etched into her skin, though her hands now looked ordinary, fragile. The whispers had changed. No longer only barren, now unnatural, cursed, dangerous. The words pressed harder than steel. To the council chamber, nobles clustered like carrion birds. They bowed when Kalen entered, but when their eyes slid to her, their reverence turned sharp. Lord Cavan, old and brittle as parchment, raised his voice. "Majesty, it cannot stand. A woman marked by sorcery has no place at your side. If the prophecy speaks true, then she is a threat to all of us." Murmurs rose, some fearful, others eager to seize the chance to unseat her. Kalen's gaze swept over them, hard as tempered iron. "You question my choice?" His tone was soft, dangerous. "You forget who keeps your borders safe." Silence spread, though resentment smoldered beneath. Elara watched, heart hammering, knowing that his defense of her would not end their scheming, only sharpen it. When the council dispersed, she lingered behind, restless. She had caught the look in Lady Miritha's eyes, triumph masked as concern. It was too familiar, too much like the look her stepmother wore when betrayal ripened. A warning coiled in her chest, though she could not yet name it. That night, she found Kalen on the training grounds, his body slick with sweat, sword striking again and again against the post until wood splintered. The fury in his movements spoke louder than words. She approached, hesitant. "They will not stop," she whispered. He lowered his blade, his breath ragged. "Let them plot. Wolves bear teeth when afraid." "Afraid of me," she said bitterly. "Afraid of what you carry," he corrected, stepping close enough that the heat of his skin brushed her chilled air. His voice dropped raw. You are not the weak one here, Ilara. Do not let them convince you otherwise. The word struck something deep, yet before she could answer, a sudden shadow moved near the gates. A maid she trusted, Lizette, slipped from the shadows, her movements too swift, too secret. Ilara frowned, her instincts stirring. Later, when Lizette returned with eyes averted, Ilara caught the faint scent of unfamiliar smoke clinging to her dress, not from palace hearths. Doubt hardened into certainty. Betrayal was closer than whispers. Why the second night? Her fears proved true. Lizette entered her chamber with a tray of wine, hands trembling too much for mere nerves. Ilara did not drink. She set the cup aside untouched, but the air itself seemed to shift, heavy with foreboding. She lay awake until the hour grew deep, when muffled footsteps slid through her door. Rough hands seized her, gagged her cry, dragging her into the dark. The world tilted into nightmare. She was carried through servant corridors, past gates left suspiciously unguarded, into the wild beyond the walls. The forest swallowed her, black branches clawing at her arms, the air thick with the musk of wolves. Her captors bore the insignia of a rival alpha, one who had long envied Kaelin's throne. Their leader sneered as he shoved her forward into a clearing lit only by a pale sliver of moon. "So this is the king's barren jewel," he mocked, circling her like a predator savoring the scent of prey. "Cursed power in a cursed shell. He thinks you fit for a queen? You are nothing but a weapon waiting to be turned." Ilara's throat closed with terror, but beneath it something else pulsed, anger sharp and rising. She straightened despite the ropes biting into her wrists. "If I am a weapon, you would be wise not to test its edge." Laughter erupted, cruel and echoing. Yet for the first time, Ilara did not feel entirely powerless. The memory of moonlight burning through her wounds lived inside her now, waiting. Far behind, a howl split the night, fierce and commanding. Her heart leapt. Kaelin. The rival alpha's face twisted, fury cutting through his amusement. "So he comes for you." The forest erupted with movement, wolves bursting through the undergrowth, teeth flashing. Her captors braced, steel and claw colliding in chaos. Through the fray she glimpsed Kaelin, his form midshift, eyes blazing gold as he tore through foes with a savagery born of desperation. But too many pressed upon him, and her scream caught behind the gag as ropes held her bound. She fought against them until blood slicked her wrists. One captor lunged at Kaelin's back, blade raised, and she cried out, the sound muffled but fierce. Kaelin turned too late. The weapon descended, her body reacted before thought. The rope snapped in her struggle, and light burst from her palms, blinding and wild. The captor shrieked, his weapon clattering useless to the ground. All around, the battle froze for a heartbeat. The forest lit with impossible radiance. Kaelin's head whipped toward her, his face fierce with both relief and dread. But then as the light faded, shadows swarmed again. Hands seized her, dragging her deeper into the trees. The last thing she saw was Kaelin breaking free, blood and fury trailing him, too far to reach her before the dark swallowed her whole. Her breath came fast against the gag, fear clawing at her chest. Yet beneath it, one thought struck like a vow. She would not remain helpless. If destiny had marked her, then she would burn before letting it be wielded by another's hand. And somewhere behind her, Kaelin's roar split the forest, a promise that he would not let her be lost. The forest was a cathedral of shadows, its branches clawing at the moon as if to tear it down. Ilara stumbled as her captors shoved her forward, the damp earth cold beneath her bare feet. They dragged her to a clearing where firelight licked at the darkness. The rival alpha stood waiting, tall and lean, his eyes gleaming with cruel hunger. He circled her slowly, savoring her silence, the gag still pressing against her lips. "They say the king shields you," he murmured, voice like a blade caressing flesh. "But power this strange does not belong to a throne. It belongs to the wild. To me." His hand lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You will break for me, barren girl, and then you will destroy him." Rage pulsed hot in her chest, but her fear was fiercer. She tore her face away, tasting blood where the gag scraped her lips. Somewhere beyond the treeline, faint but drawing closer, came the low rumble of wolves. Her heart seized. Kaelin. The rival alpha heard it too. His sneer twisted into fury. With a sharp gesture, he ordered her bound to a post, the ropes biting deep into her skin. "Let him come," he growled. "Let him watch his precious prize bleed." The night erupted before he finished the words. Kalen burst through the shadows, his shift half complete, eyes blazing gold. His roar thundered through the clearing, scattering men like frightened birds. Steel flashed, claws ripped, the air thick with blood and fury. Alara strained against her bonds, her throat raw with muffled cries. She saw him cut a path toward her, but for every foe he felled, two more lunged. The rival Alpha leapt into the fray, his form twisting grotesquely as bone and sinew tore into beast. He collided with Kalen, the ground trembling beneath their clash. They tore at each other, strength meeting strength, dominance clashing like storms. Alara could only watch, terror burning with helplessness, as Kalen staggered beneath a vicious blow. Blood spilled across his chest, dark and hot, and for one heart-stopping moment he fell to his knees, something inside her shattered. The ropes no longer mattered, the fear no longer held her. Light flared from her skin, violent and radiant, bursting the bonds apart. She stumbled free, her hands ablaze with moonfire that seared the air itself. Her captors recoiled, shielding their eyes, the fire too pure for their shadows. Kalen's head lifted, his gaze locking onto hers. His lips parted, blood staining his teeth, but in his eyes there was not defeat, there was command. Choose, his stare demanded. Claim what you are. The rival Alpha lunged for him, claws raised to end it. Alara thrust out her hands, the fire roaring from her palms, engulfing the beast in silver flame. He shrieked, writhing as the light consumed him, his form collapsing into ash that scattered with the wind. Silence followed, heavy and stunned. Kalen struggled to his feet, swaying, his body torn and failing. Alara rushed to him, her hands trembling as she pressed them to his wounds. The moonfire poured through her, wild and endless, knitting flesh, driving poison from his veins. His body arched beneath her touch, a growl rumbling from deep within his chest as if the bond itself burned into being. When the light faded, he caught her wrists, his grip firm but reverent. His eyes glowed with something more than primal fire. "You are mine," he whispered, voice rough with awe. "Not because fate says it, not because prophecy demands it, but because I will never let you go." Her throat tightened, tears cutting hot trails down her cheeks. "And I am yours," she breathed, the truth rising like dawn. The bond ignited between them then, a mark searing onto her skin where his lips pressed against her palm. Power surged through her, not a curse but a crown. Around them, the surviving enemies fled into the night, broken by the sight of what had risen in their place. When they returned to the palace, the torches of the court awaited, eyes wide with disbelief. Whispers swelled like a tide as Alara walked at Kalen's side, no longer bowed but radiant, the mate mark gleaming faintly on her skin. None dared laugh now. The prophecy had unfolded before them, undeniable. Kalen halted at the steps of the great hall, his voice carrying over the crowd. "She is no barren girl. She is queen of wolves, chosen by moon and fire. Doubt her, and you doubt me." The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time, Alara saw no mockery in their faces, only fear and awe. She lifted her chin, the weight of shame falling away, and in its place rose the steady flame of belonging. That night, beneath the moon that had watched her fall and rise, Kalen drew her close. His words brushed against her ear, softer than she thought a warrior could speak. "You were never broken, Alara. Only hidden, waiting to be found." She leaned into him, the bond pulsing steady as a heartbeat. The forest lay quiet, the court subdued, and for the first time in her life she did not feel like an absence. She felt like destiny itself. From ruin to queen, from silence to fire, she had found not only love, but power enough to change the world.